The secret code Jesus dropped in the Lord's Prayer has finally been cracked, revealing a mystery the institutional church has fought tooth and nail to keep under wraps. Every single Sunday, you have millions of folks across the globe chanting the exact same lines, like clockwork. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. But hold up, what if I hit you with the hard truth that the prayer you have been reciting since you were knee-high is not actually what the Messiah taught his inner circle? Imagine for a second that somewhere down the line, through hundreds of years of shady counsels and rewrites, a specific frequency, a single word loaded with explosive spiritual authority was snatched out on purpose. We are not talking about a simple typo or a scribe's mistake here. I am not referring to subtle nuances that just happen to get lost in translation. I am talking about a deliberate suppression of something much deeper and more dangerous to the establishment. We are discussing a master key from the original Aramaic, the street language. Jesus actually spoke that contained a spiritual activation so potent that deleting it completely neutered the most powerful prayer in Christianity. You need to let that marinate for a moment and really think about the implications. The Lord's Prayer isn't just some random poem. It is the blueprint, the only time the Messiah gave a word-for-word script when the disciples begged him, "Master, teach us how to tap in." According to the accounts in Matthew and Luke, Jesus didn't just ramble, he responded with surgical precision and intent. He left absolutely nothing to chance, meaning every single syllable was calculated for maximum spiritual impact. And yet, the versions we are reading today in our King James NIV or Catholic Bibles come from translations of Greek, which were already a step away from the original Aramaic source code. In that game of telephone, during that critical translation process, the most vital component was stripped away. Scholars who have been digging through the ancient vaults, looking at the 4th century Codex Sinaiticus and the Aramaic Peshitta, are finally seeing the cracks in the narrative. They found that Aramaic words possessing deep, multidimensional layers of meaning were watered down into flat, powerless Greek terms that lost their vibration. But it gets even darker when you start connecting the dots on the history of this cover-up. There is hard documentary proof that the early church fathers, the guys running the show in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, while the religion was being organized, knew about these alternative versions. Origen of Alexandria, one of the heaviest hitters in early theology, wrote an entire breakdown on the Lord's Prayer back in the year 233. And in his writings, he drops a major clue admitting that different communities had different flows and recitations based on their local traditions. He acknowledged that the prayer wasn't a rigid statute, but a living thing, recited differently depending on the spiritual understanding of the group. So you have to ask yourself, why did that diversity suddenly vanish from the record? Why, after the Council of Nicaea in 325, did the system decide to standardize not just the doctrine, but the specific frequency of the words coming out of your mouth? They will tell you it was for liturgical unity, to keep everyone on the same page, but the evidence points to a control mechanism. Dr. George Lamsa, the man who really understood the Aramaic mindset and translated the Bible directly from it, pointed this out clearly. When you stack the Greek against the Aramaic, you see the switch. Words that originally meant raw internal spiritual authority and a sovereign connection to the Creator were swapped out. They were replaced with terms that made you submissive words that fostered dependency on the church building and the ecclesiastical hierarchy rather than your own spirit. Do you really think that is a coincidence, or does it look like a calculated move to centralize power in the hands of the institution instead of the believer? Now, before you dismiss this as some internet conspiracy theory, let me show you the undeniable receipts. Back in 1947, inside the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea, the world discovered the oldest biblical manuscripts ever found on the planet. Hidden among those scrolls were fragments of Aramaic prayers used by the Essenes, a strict Jewish sect living right alongside Jesus using the same spiritual language. And while we didn't find a complete copy of the Lord's Prayer, we found the linguistic DNA, the prayer structures that reveal how first-century believers actually spoke to God. We discovered how they built their spiritual bridges, and it looks nothing like the formalized repetition we do today. Those patterns include a specific word that pops up over and over again whenever they entered a zone of divine intimacy. It is a word expressing a relationship so tight, so personal, and so merged with the sacred that it makes our modern translation of Father feel cold, distant, and formal. If you have ever been on your knees praying and felt like you were hitting a ceiling or sensed that something was missing from the connection, you weren't tripping. If you ever felt there was a depth of power you just couldn't reach, the historical evidence is proving that your intuition was right all along, because what I am about to break down for you isn't just going to change your morning prayer routine. It is going to shift your entire paradigm on who the Messiah really was and the level of power he actually wanted to hand over to you. But before I drop that hidden word, you need to understand the why. You need to grasp why it was considered so dangerous it had to be eliminated. For that, we have to travel back to the scene of the crime, the exact moment the original manuscripts were flipped from Aramaic to Greek, because that is where the theft occurred. That is the precise second in history where humanity was robbed of a spiritual weapon, or at least that is what they wanted us to believe. That word they tried to erase is resurfacing now because we are living in the year 2026, a time when biblical prophecy is popping off in high definition right in front of our faces. Yet the masses are still sleepwalking, trapped in the matrix of incomplete truths that were carefully hidden from the public for centuries. But imagine for a second, what if the very thing they cut out of the scriptures holds the key you have been searching for all these years? We are talking about answers that can illuminate your path, steel your faith for the hard times ahead, and reveal the true revolutionary purpose of Jesus' mission on earth. Right now, we need to go back and recover the lost frequency. To truly grasp what was scrubbed from the record, you have to understand the fundamental flaw in how we approach biblical history. Most of the Bibles sitting on nightstands today, whether they are written in Spanish, English, Portuguese, or any other modern tongue, were never translated directly from the original Aramaic source code. Instead, they were translated from Greek manuscripts. And right there is where the glitch in the matrix begins. Jesus did not walk around speaking Greek in his daily life. He spoke Aramaic. Aramaic was the heartbeat of the Jewish people in Galilee during the first century. It was the vibrational language Jesus used to teach the masses to heal the sick and to commune with the Spirit. When Jesus first unleashed the power of the Lord's Prayer, he didn't recite it in a Western tongue. He vibrated it into existence using Aramaic. His inner circle, Peter, John, James, they heard that frequency in Aramaic, and they imprinted it on their souls in that original rhythmic language. But when the Gospels were finally penned decades later, between the years 70 and 100 AD, they were recorded in Koine Greek, the business English of the Roman Empire. Why make that switch? It was strictly for marketing and expansion. Christianity was moving beyond Judea, targeting Greek and Roman hubs that had no ear for the Aramaic tongue. So the evangelists had to convert the master's living words from Aramaic into static Greek text. And that is exactly where the corruption entered the signal, according to Dr. Elaine Pagels, a heavyweight professor at Princeton University and a leading voice on early Christianity. You have to realize that every translation is actually an interpretation. When you drag a concept from one language into another, particularly when those languages represent two entirely opposite worldviews, you don't just lose words, you lose the spirit, you lose the context, and you lose the multidimensional depth. Now apply that loss to a prayer directly downloaded by Jesus. We are talking about a prayer where every syllable was selected with spiritual and sonic precision. Dr. Rocco Errico, a brilliant scholar specializing in biblical Aramaic, and the author of numerous breakdowns on this topic, breaks it down. Aramaic is not linear. It is an extremely symbolic, holographic language. A single word in Aramaic can hold 3, 4, or even 5 layers of reality, simultaneously changing based on the context, the tone, and the intention behind the speaker's voice. But in Greek, that richness is completely flattened out and stripped away. Greek is a mental language, literal, structured, rigid. It is fantastic for writing contracts, philosophy, and logic, but it is severely limited when trying to express the quantum nature of spiritual mysteries. So when those first-century Christian translators ran into these complex Aramaic concepts in the Lord's Prayer, they were forced to make choices, and those choices would end up altering the course of human spirituality forever. One of the most critical shifts happens right at the jump, the word Jesus used to address the Creator. In the versions we recite today, it simply says, "Our Father." But in the Aramaic tongue, specifically in the Peshitta version, which many scholars identify as the closest link to the source, Jesus did not use the word Father in the way we think of it in 2026. He spoke the word Abwoon. He did not say Pater or Dad. He said Abwoon. This Aramaic term has no direct English equivalent. It is a compound sound. It pulls from Abba, meaning father, but fuses it with a vibration of infinite intimacy, and woon, which implies a cosmic birthing chamber, a source, or a womb. So when Jesus declared Abwoon de Boishmaya, which we translate as Our Father, who art in heaven, he wasn't talking about a man in the sky. He was invoking the divine origin, the primal source from which all life flows. He was speaking of the creative force, the cosmic womb that holds the entire universe together. Do you see the massive shift in perspective? Father creates a hierarchy. Father feels distant like an authority figure or a judge. Abwoon is intimate. It speaks to your origin, your direct umbilical connection with the source of all existence. However, the Greek translators opted for the word pater, which strictly denotes a father in the traditional, rigid, patriarchal sense of the Roman world. And with that single decision, the mystical depth of Jesus' true teaching was deleted from the file. We lost the understanding that God is not just some external king sitting on a throne light years away, but the very breath of our existence, a force that is simultaneously surrounding us and living within us. This is what Dr. Neil Douglas-Klotz, the founder of the International Institute of Aramaic Studies, has spent decades uncovering. He has been digging for the truth beneath the translation. His research proves that the Aramaic version of the Lord's Prayer reveals a completely different intent. Jesus wasn't teaching us to beg and plead to a distant deity. He was teaching us a method of alignment, an invocation to reconnect our frequency with the divine source inside of us. And that word Abwoon was the password to get in. But there was even more that got scrubbed, something incredibly specific. There was a word positioned right in the middle of the prayer, tied to the concepts of debt forgiveness and spiritual liberation that was completely mutated in later translations. When you finally uncover what that word is and the power it held, you will understand exactly why it was considered so dangerous to the power structures of the early church. Because if the masses understood the true definition of that word, the entire system of control would collapse. They would no longer need a priest to dial up God for them. They would realize they had no need for confessions paid penance or absolutions granted by human men. The keys to spiritual liberation would be sitting right in the palms of their own hands. And for an institution that was building its empire on being the toll booth to heaven, that kind of freedom was unacceptable. It was the secret language of Jesus that had to be silenced. If you truly want to grasp what was eliminated from the Lord's Prayer, you have to understand a crucial fact about Aramaic. It isn't just an ancient dialect. It is a sacred technology, a language designed to transmit not just data, but a spiritual vibration that physically alters reality. Deep traditions preserved by Jewish mystics, specifically those medieval Kabbalists who guarded the most ancient scrolls, tell us something profound about the Aramaic language that most people miss completely. They teach that every single word isn't just a label for a thing, it is a sacred acoustic event. Each syllable carries a specific measurable frequency that when you vibrate it correctly in your throat actually unlocks elevated states of spiritual consciousness. We aren't talking about some airy-fairy abstract mysticism here, folks. This is hardcore spiritual linguistics. We're looking at the science of sound and how it interacts with the human spirit. Dr. Rocco Errico, in his groundbreaking work, Let There Be Light. The Seven Keys breaks it down by explaining that Aramaic is constructed on what scholars call trilateral roots. These are three specific consonants that form the unshakable DNA of every single word. And let me tell you, those three consonants were not just thrown together by random chance. They were meticulously selected by ancient Hebrew and Aramaic sages, wise men, who understood acoustic physics, because that specific combination produces a vibratory resonance that changes reality. Take a look at the word shlama, for instance. In Aramaic, we translate it as peace, but that English word is weak. Shlama literally translates to fullness, absolute integrity, and total completeness. When you speak shlama with the right intention and the proper guttural intonation, you aren't just uttering vocabulary. You are literally invoking a physical and spiritual state of being into existence. You are tuning your personal energy field to match the frequency of divine completeness. Now take that concept and apply it to every single syllable of the Lord's Prayer. This means that every phrase Yeshua Jesus spoke in his native Aramaic wasn't just a request or a hymn of praise like we do in church today. It was a sophisticated sequence of sacred sounds, a sonic code designed to elevate the consciousness of the person praying and lock them directly into attunement with the Most High. But here's the tragedy: when you strip those words of their sonic power, translate them into Greek, then wash them down into Latin and finally into modern English, that original vibration is dead. You are left holding the empty shell of the meaning, the superficial definition, without any of the transformative, chain-breaking power of the original sound frequency. Dr. Neil Douglas-Klotz, in his revolutionary book Prayers of the Cosmos, put this to the test with a fascinating real-world experiment that blows the lid off this suppression. He brought together diverse groups, Christians, Jews, Muslims, and even agnostics, and he trained them to chant the Lord's Prayer in the original Aramaic, hitting every word with its authentic ancient intonation. The results were undeniable. The vast majority of these participants reported earth-shattering spiritual breakthroughs, intense sensations of connecting with the divine. They described states of inexplicable peace that surpassed understanding, and even mystical experiences where they felt completely unified with the entire cosmos. And here's the kicker: this happened regardless of what they believed theologically. Why? Because the Aramaic language bypasses your logical, westernized brain entirely. It goes straight to the core and activates what the ancients called ruach, the divine breath. That spark of the spirit that has been dormant inside every single human being, waiting to be woken up. Now we have to ask the hard question, the one that makes the establishment uncomfortable. If the true power of the Lord's Prayer is locked in the Aramaic sounds, why hasn't the church ever taught us this? Why is it that after 2,000 years, the overwhelming majority of believers have absolutely no clue what the prayer Jesus taught actually sounded like or felt like? The answer, according to deep dive studies into early Christianity by scholars like Dr. Elaine Pagels, comes down to one ugly truth: institutional control and power dynamics. You see, back in the first 3 centuries of the faith, before the official church hierarchy solidified its iron grip, there were 1,000 different ways people were walking this path. It was a time of spiritual freedom. Communities were everywhere. Some emphasized direct mystical downloads like the Gnostics, while others valued raw prophecy. You had groups like the Montanists who flowed in the gift of tongues, and you had communities that stuck to the roots, practicing their rituals in Aramaic and keeping Yeshua's original teachings alive. But then came the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 AD, when Emperor Constantine decided to hijack the movement and unify Christianity as the state religion of the Roman Empire. That was the turning point where everything shifted from spiritual relationship to political control. The ecclesiastical authorities started standardizing everything, not just the doctrine, but the liturgy itself. They adopted Latin, the language of the oppressor, the language of Rome, as the official tongue of the church in the West, stripping away the Afro-Asiatic roots of the faith. Unauthorized translations were banned, and any community that dared to continue praying in the power of Aramaic was systematically marginalized, silenced, or branded as heretics. Why? Because they knew a secret. People who know the original words of Jesus, who can recite his prayers in the sacred frequency he used, do not need a middleman to get to God. They don't need a priest in a robe to tell them if they are worthy. They don't need to pay for access or jump through religious hoops. They don't need confessionals or institutions to mediate their relationship with the Creator, because they have the direct line. They have direct access. And let's be real, direct access has always been, and still is, the greatest threat to any religious power structure that relies on controlling the masses through fear and dependency. This is about spiritual sovereignty. It is about taking back the keys to the kingdom that were hidden from us by centuries of tradition and Romanized theology. I need to hear from you, family. Have you ever heard about the vibrational power of the original Aramaic before this moment? Drop a line in the comments section below. I am genuinely fascinated to see how many true seekers of truth are out there. Your experience might be the light that wakes someone else up who is just starting to see through the matrix of religion. Let's talk about Abba. This is more than just a word. It is a spiritual portal. You already know by now that Jesus didn't speak Greek, and he certainly didn't speak Latin. He spoke Aramaic, and you know that the word he used to connect with God, Abwoon, completely transcends the simple static translation of Father that we see in our English Bibles. But we need to go deeper. We need to look at a word that Jesus used repeatedly, not just in the prayer, but in the most critical, high-stakes moments of his earthly walk. This is a word that the gospel writers felt was so powerful, so untranslatable, that they preserved it in its original Aramaic form, even when they were writing in Greek. That word is Abba. It doesn't just show up anywhere. It appears in the Gospels in very specific emotionally charged contexts where the veil between heaven and earth is thin. The most famous instance is in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the moment of truth, right before the arrest, when Jesus is praying with such intensity that he is sweating blood. According to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verse 36, Jesus cries out, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me." Sujwab. Pay attention to this detail. Mark, who is writing his account in Greek for a Greek-speaking audience, refused to translate Abba. He kept it raw. He kept it authentic. Why would he do that? Because he understood that Abba carries a frequency and an intimacy that has no exact translation in any other language on earth. We are talking about a linguistic frequency, a specific sound that unlocks a level of intimacy with the Creator, so profound, so raw and personal, that no other language on earth possesses a true equivalent. According to the research of Dr. Joachim Jeremias, a heavyweight in 20th century biblical scholarship and a professor at the University of Göttingen, this concept shifts everything we thought we knew. He revealed that the word Abba was the very first babble from the mouths of toddlers in ancient Judea, a term used to cry out to their parents, devoid of any stiff formality. It was the cultural equivalent of saying daddy or papa, but deeper. It signified a bond of absolute tenderness, a reliance without hesitation, and a closeness that knew no walls or barriers. You have to understand the context. No devout, law-abiding Jew of that time period would have ever dreamed of addressing the Most High in such a casual manner. The tradition demanded a fearful distance. To them, God was Adonai the Master. He was Elohim the Mighty One. He was YHWH, the name so holy it could not even be spoken aloud by human lips. Never in their history was there something so approachable, so informal, and so dangerously intimate as Abba. Yet this is exactly how Jesus moved, and he commanded his students to operate in the same frequency. When the disciples approached him, desperate for access, asking, "Master, show us the blueprint for prayer," Jesus didn't give them a ritual. He gave them a relationship. Looking at the oldest Aramaic manuscripts, the original tongue, he launched the prayer with Abba de Bashmaya, which translates to Daddy of the Cosmos, the intimate birther of the heavens, the loving source of all reality. This was a complete paradigm shift, a revolutionary act, because if the architect of the universe can be called Abba, if the Creator can be summoned with the tenderness of a child reaching for a father, everything changes. It means the massive, terrifying gap between the human experience and the divine realm completely collapses, shattering the illusion of separation that religion tries to maintain. We are no longer dealing with a distant, angry God sitting on a throne, light years away, unreachable and untouchable by the common man. Instead, we find a loving presence that vibrates with intimacy, a spirit that catches the whisper of your heart and resides closer to you than the very oxygen filling your lungs right now. Dr. Neil Douglas-Klotz breaks it down, further explaining that in the Aramaic tongue, Abba is tied to the root word ab, which signifies the origin, the generator, and the fertile soil. So realize that Abba is not just daddy in a biological sense. It is the source from which all life springs, the fountainhead of existence itself. It represents the cosmic womb, the loving singularity and origin point of every atom and spirit that exists in this dimension and beyond. When Jesus invited his followers to vibrate on the frequency of Abba, he wasn't handing them a religious script to memorize. He was handing them the keys to a spiritual portal. He was unveiling the truth that every single human being possesses a direct line to the divine source with zero need for third-party negotiators or gatekeepers. You do not need the stone temples. You do not need the blood sacrifices, and you certainly do not need a priest to interpret your worthiness to the Creator. You have the authority to call upon God just as a toddler calls for a parent with total boldness, with pure, unfiltered love, and with the absolute knowing that you will be answered. Now you can see why this teaching was considered dangerous to the establishment. If the masses woke up to this direct, intimate connection, what power would be left for the religious elite? If the system is bypassed, why would you need a building or a hierarchy when the Most High responds to the Abba whispered in the secret chamber of your own soul? Why would anyone pay for intermediaries or jump through ritualistic hoops if the divine source is already flowing through their veins like their own breath? This is exactly why, as Christianity was turned into an institution and an official state religion, with power structures, this radical liberating intimacy had to be watered down. They translated the explosive word Abba into the generic formal title of Father, Skadi stripping away the revolutionary affection it held. While Father is close, it still carries a stiff formality, a sense of authority and distance that keeps you in line rather than in love. But there is a deeper layer to Abba, that the history books often gloss over a secret that ties this word to an ancient spiritual lineage kept alive by Jewish mystics. Once you grasp this hidden connection, you will understand exactly why Jesus selected this specific vibration to unlock the most potent prayer ever delivered to humanity. We need to talk about the Qumran manuscripts and the prayer that was effectively forbidden or forgotten by the mainstream narrative. Back in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd chasing a stray goat stumbled into a cave near the Dead Sea, and what he uncovered shattered our perception of ancient Judaism and the roots of the faith. He found sealed ceramic jars containing scrolls that had been resting there for more than 2,000 years, the legendary Dead Sea Scrolls. The archaeologists who analyzed these treasures confirmed they belonged to the Essenes, a breakaway Jewish sect living in the desert between 150 BC and 68 AD, overlapping perfectly with the life of Jesus. Even though the canonical Gospels do not drop the name Essenes explicitly, the evidence suggests a profound link. Leading scholars, including Dr. James Vanderkam from the University of Notre Dame, are convinced that Jesus interacted with, or was at least deeply influenced by, this desert community. The proof is in the pudding. The teachings of Jesus mirror the concepts found in the Essene texts at Qumran, almost word for word in some instances. Radical ideas like, the kingdom of God is within you, the priority of inner spirit over outer ritual and direct communion. Without the priesthood, these were Essene trademarks. All of these revolutionary concepts were already written down in the Essene scrolls long before the institutional church took over. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Among those dusty manuscripts at Qumran, they discovered prayers written in Aramaic. These were the daily devotions of the Essene Brotherhood. And according to Dr. Geza Vermes, a premier translator of the scrolls from Oxford, the similarities are undeniable. He points out that these ancient prayers possess a structure that is shockingly similar to what we know today as the Lord's Prayer. In fact, one of these texts opens with the exact same frequency, utilizing that intimate password, Abba, hallowed be your name. It's the same opening, the same specific trigger word, Abba, and the exact same theological concept of holding the divine name as sacred. This is no accident. It proves that the prayer Jesus taught was not created in a vacuum, but was part of a powerful pre-existing spiritual current. He was tapping into an ancient mystical tradition preserved by groups like the Essenes, who sought truth outside of the corrupt religious systems of their day. However, there is still more hidden within those scrolls, a secret depth that most standard translations conveniently leave out of the conversation. The Essenes were not just a random religious sect. They were the guardians of a specific, highly potent spiritual protocol deeply connected to the frequency of the divine name. If you dig into the ancient archives specifically, manuscript 4Q521, famously known as the Messianic Hymn, you discover a startling truth. The Essenes held the conviction that vibrating the true esoteric name of the Most High, not the watered-down public label used in the temples, but the secret acoustic key known only to the initiated, possessed the kinetic energy to physically heal bodies, shatter chains of bondage, and radically alter the fabric of reality. And let's be clear, we are not talking about the standard anglicized YHW letters that most people see in footnotes today. This was a complex compound frequency that was rooted in the primal sound Ab, meaning Father the origin, the zero-point source of all things. When a member of the Essene Brotherhood went into prayer, they weren't just reciting memorized lines like a script. They were actively engaging in spiritual warfare, invoking cosmic forces through precise sacred sounds. And every single time, that invocation initiated with a visceral, intimate lock-in to that divine origin point, Abba. Now pay close attention, because this is the critical pivot point where history and spirituality collide. If Yeshua or Jesus was indeed trained in this high-frequency environment by the Essenes or a similar mystical underground, then what we call the Lord's Prayer is absolutely not a passive petition for help. It is an active invocation. It is a sophisticated spiritual code. It is a sonic key, a vibrational password that, when resonated correctly in the original Aramaic tongue, literally hacks the matrix, opening up portals of higher consciousness and establishing a direct line to the throne room. But watch what happened when the system got involved. As soon as that potent prayer was translated into Greek and subsequently flattened into Latin, the voltage dropped to zero. A weapon of mass deliverance was reduced to a series of polite, pious requests completely stripped of its original function as a quantum tool for the transformation of the human soul. According to the brilliant scholar Dr. Elaine Pagels, this dilution of power was by no means an accident. It was a calculated move by the powers that be. In her groundbreaking work, The Gnostic Gospels, she lays out the blueprint of the suppression. She explains that as Christianity was being co-opted and consolidated as the state-sponsored religion of the Roman Empire, the real mystical practices, the ones that gave people direct access to the spirit realm, were systematically targeted and marginalized. You have to ask yourself why. The answer is simple, true. Mystical spirituality is a threat because it renders institutions obsolete. When you have the direct line, you don't need their elaborate marble temples, and you certainly don't need their priestly hierarchies telling you what you can and cannot do. True awakening is based on personal experience, on a direct, unmediated interface with the divine. And let me tell you, that kind of spiritual independence terrified the church model that was being constructed. They were building a centralized control grid designed to gatekeep access to God, forcing everyone to go through their sacraments, their rituals, and their appointed ecclesiastical authorities to get to the truth. The Essenes, with their straight-to-the-source spirituality, their total rejection of the corrupt temple banking system, and their obsession with inner purity represented the exact antithesis of that control model. That is precisely why, following the devastation of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Essene community was effectively scrubbed from the official history books. Their libraries were buried in the desert, their sacred texts were hidden away, and their methods were largely forgotten by the masses. The sanitized Christian versions that eventually rose to dominance worked over time to eliminate any trace of that mystical tradition keeping the world in the dark for centuries until the timeline shifted. Then in 1947, the earth literally opened up. Those caves were breached, and the manuscripts revealed secrets that had been suppressed for nearly 2,000 years, right on time for this era of awakening. But hold on, because we haven't even touched the third rail yet, the most controversial word in the entire sequence of the Lord's Prayer. It sits right in the center, dealing with the heavy concepts of forgiveness and liberation. This is a word that, if you truly grasp its original Aramaic definition, will completely rewrite your internal programming regarding guilt, sin, and the concept of redemption. And when the institutional church realized the liberating, chain-breaking power contained within that single word, they did everything in their power to water it down. They obscured the unpronounceable name hidden within the prayer to keep the flock dependent. There is a secret encoded in the DNA of the Lord's Prayer that very few believers are aware of today. It is a mystery woven into the very structure of the verses, a hidden link to the most sacred concept in Hebraic tradition, the unspoken name of God. In the roots of Judaism, there exists a divine name considered so radioactive with holiness that it is forbidden to be spoken aloud. We are talking about the Tetragrammaton YHWH. These 4 Hebrew letters are not just a label, they represent the personal signature of the Creator revealed directly to Moses on Mount Sinai, as recorded in the book of Exodus. However, according to rabbinic tradition, after the first temple was destroyed in 586 BC, the knowledge of how to audibly vibrate that name correctly was lost to the ages. The high priests who held the keys to the exact pronunciation died out without fully transmitting the frequency to the next generation. And since that time, pious Jews have avoided trying to pronounce YHWH, entirely replacing it with safe substitutes like Adonai, meaning Lord, or Hashem, simply meaning the name. But the Kabbalists, the underground Jewish mystics who study the metaphysical levels of the Torah, kept the receipts. They preserved the secret knowledge regarding that name. According to the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah written in the 13th century but rooted in oral traditions from way back, the Tetragrammaton is not a noun. It is a formula. It is a blueprint for reality. Each letter represents a specific dimension of how the divine manifests in our world. Yod is the Y, the original point, the seminal creative spark. He is the H, the expansion, the divine breath pushing that spark outward. Vav is the V, the bridge, the lightning rod, connecting heaven to earth. And the final, he is the manifestation, the grounding of that energy back into the physical realm. Together, these letters form a complete circuit. It is a spiritual electrical loop, emanation, expansion, connection, and finally, solid manifestation. And here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing for us in 2026. According to deep dive studies by Dr. Yitzhak Buxbaum, an expert in Jewish mysticism, when you analyze the architecture of the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, you find it follows this exact same sequence. The prayer is segmented into 4 primary quadrants, and each section corresponds perfectly to one of the letters of the tetragrammaton. The first section, Abba Dishmaya, Heavenly Father hallowed, be your name, corresponds to the Yud. It is the recognition of the divine origin, the initial creative spark. The second section, Tete Malkuthak, Thy kingdom come, corresponds to the He. It represents the expansion of the divine presence filling up our manifested reality. The third section, Thy will be done, corresponds to the Vav. This is the bridge, the connecting link between the divine will in the ether and human action on the ground. And the fourth section, Havlan Yomaden, give us today our necessary bread, corresponds to the final He. This is the concrete manifestation, the material sustenance appearing as an expression of divine provision. It is not just a prayer, it is the name of God expanded into a functional program for living. Can you truly grasp the magnitude of what is happening here? The Messiah wasn't simply handing out a basic list of prayer requests to the masses. He was strategically embedding the ineffable name of the Most High into a specific frequency of speech, creating a workaround that allowed anyone to recite it without breaking the sacred laws against speaking the tetragrammaton aloud. It was a divinely engineered method to tap directly into the total weight of the glory, the Shekinah, without requiring the secret clearance or the hidden pronunciations that were strictly reserved for the Levitical priesthood in the temple. This was a radical act of spiritual liberation, effectively handing the keys of the kingdom to the common man and democratizing access to the Holy of Holies. And you have to understand how dangerous this was to the religious establishment of that day. If a fisherman, a tax collector, or anyone, regardless of their status or ritual cleanliness, could vibrate with the Creator's total power just by reciting the Lord's Prayer in the original Aramaic tongue, the whole system changes. Who needs a brick-and-mortar temple? Who needs a high priest taking your tithes? Why would you need any human intermediary when you have a direct line to the source? This isn't just speculation. It is backed by heavy scholarship. According to Dr. Michael Weiss, a brilliant mind at Northwestern University, and a heavyweight authority on the Dead Sea Scrolls, this concept was the single most disruptive teaching emerging from the first-century mystical assemblies. They held a belief that modern religion tries to suppress, that every single one of us houses a fragment of the divine, a literal shard of the Creator's own name living in our DNA, and that plugging back into that power source didn't demand blood sacrifices or external pageantry. It required an internal revolution of alignment, purification, and spiritual awakening. And the technology for this ascension was precise frequency, righteous prayer, specific invocation, and the correct holy sound. The Messiah, steeped in these deep mystical traditions, took high-level cosmic data and compressed it into a user-friendly interface that anyone could operate. This text was never meant to be mumbled mindlessly by rote on Sunday mornings. It was designed as a sonic key, a vibrational password. When you hit those Aramaic notes with focused intent and consciousness, you are literally turning the ignition on your inner divinity, tuning your spirit to resonate with the frequency of the universe itself. However, when the system was ported over to the Greek language, the code got corrupted. All that complex encoded structure fell apart. The literal words made the transfer sure, but the energetic architecture, the direct wire to the tetragrammaton, was severed. The spiritual circuit breaker was removed and remained hidden. Over the ages, even the memory that this technology existed was wiped from the hard drive of history until right now. Because what you are waking up to isn't just a history lesson. It is part of the Great Awakening of 2026. We are stripping away the paint to see the original masterpiece, bypassing centuries of institutional gatekeeping to get back to the raw, uncut teachings of the Messiah. Yet we have not even scratched the surface of the biggest bombshell awaiting us. We have covered the opening sequence, the encoded structure, and the deep mystical connections, but deep in the center of this prayer lies the most manipulated concept of all. Right there in the very heart of the Lord's Prayer, in the verse that speaks about forgiveness, hides a word that has been altered more than any other. There is a word hidden there that, if you truly comprehended its original Aramaic roots, would shatter everything you think you know about guilt, sin, and redemption. Get ready, because we are about to pull back the curtain on this mystery right now. You have to understand the original followers, the early assembly, knew this secret long before Rome hijacked the faith and turned it into a state religion. Before the Council of Nicaea, before the creeds were written, before the golden cathedrals and the rigid ecclesiastical hierarchies took power, there were the apostolic fathers. These were the men who walked with the apostles or studied under their immediate students, men who lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, when the word was still thundering in Aramaic, before it got watered down into Greek text and lost its vibrational power. These men wrote extensively about the Lord's Prayer, and their records prove they held keys to the kingdom that were subsequently hidden from the public eye. One of the most significant figures in this lineage was Origen of Alexandria, who lived from 185 to 254 AD. Origen was a theological giant of early Christianity, penning over 2,000 works, though the system made sure most of them vanished into the sands of time. But in the year 233 AD, he dropped a massive treatise simply called On Prayer, dissecting the Lord's Prayer with surgical precision. And in that document, Origen mentions something fascinating, that across the believers' world, in different regions like Syria, Egypt, and Asia Minor, people weren't reciting the prayer the same way. These weren't arguments over doctrine, they were linguistic footprints. They were differences in language that reflected the struggle of different traditions trying to capture the lightning of Aramaic in the bottle of the Greek language. Origen realized that some of these variations were actually preserving the spiritual juice and nuances of the original that the standardized corporate versions were deleting. He zeroes in specifically on the phrase we know as, "and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." He pointed out that in some communities they used the word offenses instead of debts, while others said sins. It was a translation mess. Why the confusion? Because the word the Messiah actually spoke was koba. And let me tell you, that word does not fit into a neat little English box. In Aramaic, koba technically translates to debt, but we aren't talking about a credit card bill or an economic transaction like we understand today. In the deep Aramaic spiritual context, koba speaks to bondage. It refers to everything that tethers you to the past, the repetitive trauma loops, and the unresolved emotional baggage weighing you down. It is the spiritual gravity preventing your spirit from ascending and flowing freely. Origen understood this completely. That is why he writes in his treatise that forgiving our debts isn't just about saying sorry for breaking a moral rule. It is about severing the energetic cords and untying the spiritual knots that keep us enslaved. This interpretation is profound because it shifts the paradigm entirely. You aren't just begging for a pardon from a distant judge. You are declaring a total spiritual emancipation and breaking the chains of your own captivity. You are not just requesting a simple pardon, you are demanding that the invisible ethereal cables binding you to cycles of generational trauma, narcotic relationships, and self-destructive loops be severed immediately. And when you utter the phrase, "as we forgive our debtors," do not make the mistake of thinking you are cutting a moral business deal with the Creator. You are activating a cosmic statute recognizing a spiritual law that dictates you can only shatter your own shackles when you stop acting as the jailer for those who have trespassed against you. The ancient mystic Origen understood this deep in his bones, and the early followers of the Way who chanted these prayers in the rhythmic power of Aramaic knew exactly what frequency they were tapping into. However, by the time the Middle Ages arrived and the prayer was locked into the rigid, legalistic structure of Latin, that profound vibrating energy was stripped away. The translators selected the Latin word debita, which refers to debt in a literal financial sense, turning the Lord's Prayer into a cold, moral ledger sheet. It became, "I pay, you pay, God balances the books," simple, transactional, and utterly superficial, causing the mystical dimension of true spiritual liberation to vanish into thin air. We see this struggle in the writings of another heavyweight of the faith, Tertullian, who wrote between the years 160 and 220 AD, and is often hailed as the father of Latin theology. In his explosive treatise on prayer, Tertullian goes to war over the correct translation of this phrase, warning the believers of his time not to view it merely as a wipe down of individual sins. He argued that it must be interpreted as a total emancipation, a complete liberation from every frequency entity or attachment that creates a gap between your spirit and the divine source. You have to ask yourself, why did these men who stood so close to the epicenter of Christianity's origin possess such radical, profound interpretations? The answer is simple, yet devastating, because they still had a direct line to the oral traditions of Aramaic culture. They were still breaking bread and conversing with communities that held on to the vibration and nuance of the original language, but as the centuries ground on those potent traditions were watered down. By the time we hit the 4th century, when Emperor Constantine called the shots at the Council of Nicaea, the agenda had shifted away from preserving mystical secrets. The new priority was political consolidation to manufacture one empire, one church, one creed, and one standardized liturgy to rule them all. In that massive machine of unification, the spiritual depths were the first casualties sacrificed on the altar of institutional simplicity and control. I need to know where my remnant is stationed right now. Drop your location in the comments, because I am thrilled to see these ancient truths waking up thirsty souls across the planet. Represent your country or your city so we can visualize this global network of truth seekers, but listen closely, because we have arrived at the singularity of this message. We need to talk about the specific word that shifted the timeline, because it wasn't just hoba, the concept of debt, that was altered in the translation. There was another term in that same frequency, a word linked to the act of release that in the original Aramaic held a meaning so explosive and liberating that it threatened the establishment. Its literal translation would have been completely unacceptable for a church hierarchy that was building its absolute authority on the exclusive power to bind and loose the sins of the people. That forbidden word is about to be unveiled. But first we must understand the council that changed the world. The year 325 AD marked the point of no return for Christian history. Emperor Constantine, who was newly converted, or at least politically savvy enough to ally with the rising tide of Christianity, made his move. He summoned more than 300 bishops from every corner of the Roman Empire to converge on the city of Nicaea, located in what we now call Turkey. The cover story, the official objective, was to resolve doctrinal disputes, specifically the Arian controversy regarding the divine nature of Christ. But there was a shadow agenda at Nicaea, something that is conveniently left out of your standard ecclesiastical history textbooks. That council was not just about defining who God was, it was about standardizing how you spoke to him. And according to Dr. Henry Chadwick, an emeritus professor at Cambridge, this was the moment the control grid went online. Chadwick, one of the world's leading experts on the early church, identified Nicaea as the beginning of the great uniformization of Christian liturgy. Before the iron fist of Nicaea came down, the Spirit moved in diverse ways, and different Christian communities prayed with unique flavors and rhythms. The churches in Syria and Mesopotamia thundered in Aramaic or Syriac, while the mystics in Egypt flowed in Coptic. The assemblies in Greece and Asia Minor utilized the precision of Greek, and the emerging churches in the West were just beginning to adopt Latin. Each of these traditions preserved a unique facet of the original diamond, but Constantine had no use for diversity. He needed absolute unity to hold his fracturing empire together. His vision was totalitarian: one empire, one state-sanctioned church, and exactly one authorized way to worship. According to the records of the historian Eusebius of Caesarea, who sat in the room at Nicaea, the council issued strict directives on how sacraments were to be performed and how the main prayers must be standardized. And right at the top of that list of standardized prayers was the Lord's Prayer. Now, while we don't have the meeting minutes showing a specific debate over the translation of the Lord's Prayer at Nicaea, we know the aftermath thanks to scholars like Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman from the University of North Carolina has shown that post-Nicaea, a massive operation was launched to scrub the texts. A systematic process of correction began where professional scribes were commissioned to copy scriptures only according to the versions approved by the high ecclesiastical authorities. It was an ancient form of information control, ensuring that the approved narrative was the only one that survived into the future. During this purge, textual variants that differed from the official imperial versions were gradually eliminated, and you might ask, what does this have to do with the Lord's Prayer? It has absolutely everything to do with it, because the communities that refused to conform those who kept praying in Aramaic, especially in Syria and Mesopotamia, preserved a timeline that the empire tried to delete. That difference was hidden precisely in the phrase about forgiveness, and we find it in the Peshitta version, the Bible in Syriac, a sister language to the Aramaic spoken by Jesus. In this preserved text, the phrase does not simply recite the passive request, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." It declares something far more powerful, stating with authority. We need to go deeper than the surface-level translations we've been fed for centuries, family. The literal translation is, "Liberate us from our bindings, as we liberate those who are bound to us." Do you catch that shift in power? Do you see the massive difference in intent? It is not just about forgiveness in the way modern Western culture teaches it. The original Aramaic word here is shbach. This word means to release, to liberate, to completely untie the knot. It is about shattering chains, not just saying, "I'm sorry." This is not some passive act of moral absolution or a simple apology to authority. This is an aggressive act of spiritual liberation. When you pray this way, you are not begging for your sins to be erased from some celestial ledger or naughty list. You are demanding that spiritual shackles, karmic cycles, deep-seated emotional wounds, and toxic soul ties be severed immediately. You are breaking the generational curses that have held your bloodline down for too long. And listen closely, when you speak these words, you are not making a conditional business deal with the Most High. You aren't trading good behavior for blessings. You are acknowledging a fundamental, unchangeable law of the spirit realm. You can only be truly free when you release the hold you have on others. Freedom is a reciprocal flow. You have to understand that your own chains are intrinsically connected to the chains you have placed on your brothers and sisters. True spiritual liberation is a process of untying the knots not sitting in the judge's seat. Now, this is a profoundly mystical teaching, deep knowledge that the ancients understood. But this kind of power was completely unacceptable for the institutional church system that rose up after the Council of Nicaea. You have to ask yourself, why? Because if spiritual liberation is something you can achieve yourself simply by untying your own bonds and releasing others from theirs, then the whole power structure crumbles. If you hold the keys to your own freedom, why would you need sacramental confession? Why would you need penance imposed by a man in a robe? Why would you need ecclesiastical absolution if you have a direct line to the source? Dr. James Robinson, an emeritus professor at Claremont Graduate University and the general editor of the Nag Hammadi Library, breaks this down clearly. He explains that this issue of authority was a constant war zone in early Christianity. The mystical communities, the Gnostics, the Syriac Orientals, and the Montanists, they all emphasized direct spiritual experience. They taught self-liberation and personal connection with the divine, bypassing the middleman. But the institutional church, they doubled down on sacramental mediation and clerical authority. They needed you to believe that the only way to God was through their doors and their rules. And when that institutional system gained political dominance after Constantine took the throne, those mystical, liberating versions of the faith were systematically hunted down and suppressed. Ancient texts that taught you how to free yourself were declared heretical and burned. Communities that prayed in the original Aramaic were gradually forced into Latin rites. The truth was gentrified, and words that suggested you didn't need human intermediaries were subtly altered in the translations to keep the masses dependent on the system. Shbach, which means liberate, was changed to aphemi in Greek, meaning simply to forgive. And then it became dimittere in Latin, meaning to let go or dismiss. The superficial meaning was kept, but the transformative chain-breaking power was diluted. But even with all these alterations, even with centuries of translations, rewrites, and standardizations designed to control the narrative, the original power of the Lord's Prayer could not be completely extinguished. Because there is something locked inside those ancient words, even in their watered-down, translated forms, that continues to resonate deep in the human soul. There is a frequency there that transcends language barriers and theological interpretations. There is something encoded not just in the syntax, but in the very vibratory structure of the prayer itself. It is a sonic key waiting for you to turn it. And when you understand that code, when you consciously activate that vibration with intent, something extraordinary happens in your reality. We're talking about something that modern science in 2026 is just barely beginning to catch up to. This is the word that activates your spiritual DNA. What I am about to share with you might sound strange to those who have been programmed to think of prayer as just a religious ritual, but hard scientific evidence is revealing something fascinating. It turns out that words, especially when pronounced with conscious, focused intention, have the actual power to alter our physical and spiritual reality. I am not talking about woo-woo pseudoscience here, folks. I am talking about serious studies conducted by recognized institutions that are finally admitting what the ancients knew thousands of years ago. Dr. Masaru Emoto, a brilliant Japanese researcher, conducted those now famous experiments where he exposed water to different words, sounds, and intentions. When the water was exposed to high-frequency words like love and gratitude, the frozen ice crystals formed beautiful, harmonious, and symmetrical geometric patterns. But when that same water was exposed to low-frequency words like hate and fear, the crystals became chaotic, ugly, and deformed. The vibration changed the physical matter. His work, which has been published in multiple books and documented with thousands of photographs, suggests that words carry specific vibratory frequencies that directly affect the molecular structure of water. And you might ask, what does this have to do with the Lord's Prayer? It has absolutely everything to do with it, because the human body is composed of over 70% water. Every single word you pronounce, especially when you speak it with deep emotional intention, is literally rewriting the water molecules inside your own body. Now take that concept and apply it to a prayer that has been chanted for 2 millennia. This is a prayer that was designed not only in its intellectual content, but in its sonic quality to produce its specific healing resonances. It is a sound weapon. Aramaic as a sacred language was structured by ancient sages who had a deep advanced understanding of sound vibration and somatics. Every Aramaic word is built on roots that produce specific frequencies when pronounced correctly to heal the body. Dr. Neil Douglas-Klotz, whom we have mentioned before on this journey, conducted profound studies with meditation groups. He taught people to recite the Lord's Prayer in the original Aramaic while measuring their brain waves with an electroencephalogram or EEG. The results were absolutely blowing the minds of the researchers involved. When participants recited the prayer in Aramaic, they quickly shifted into theta brainwave states. These are the states associated with deep meditation, heightened creativity, and direct spiritual connection, the zone. But when they recited the exact same prayer in English or Spanish, those theta states were much less pronounced, barely registering on the scale. Why is that? Because the Aramaic sound frequencies activate something in the brain, a spiritual technology that the translations simply fail to replicate. The translation is like a photocopy of a masterpiece. The soul is missing. There is something in the raw vibration of words like Abwoon, Shemaya, and Malkuta that produces a resonance with the deepest structures of our consciousness. It wakes up the sleeper. And now here is what is most fascinating of all as we move further into the revelations of 2026. Listen, the science is finally catching up to what the ancestors have known for centuries, especially now as we move deeper into 2026. We are seeing groundbreaking studies in epigenetics. That's the science of how your environment flips your genetic switches on and off, proving that your very DNA is listening to the frequencies you surround yourself with. You need to look at the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, a heavyweight in cellular biology and the mind behind the biology of belief. He's breaking down the old school idea that your genetics are set in stone. He's telling us that your DNA isn't just a static blueprint or a passive script. It is actually a high-tech organic antenna. Your cells are active receivers, constantly downloading electromagnetic data and signals from the world around you, processing information in real time. And here is where it gets deep. Some of the most powerful signals your body receives are sound vibrations, specifically the spoken word. The vocabulary you use carries a frequency weight. According to Lipton's research, when you speak with serious emotional grit and intention, especially those ancient words charged with heavy spiritual authority, you are broadcasting a command signal directly to your double helix. You have the power to literally turn specific genes on or shut them down. Don't get it twisted. This isn't some airy-fairy New Age mysticism or wishful thinking. This is hardcore molecular biology meeting spiritual truth. This completely shifts our understanding of prayer. Think about it. When the Messiah taught the Lord's Prayer in the original Aramaic tongue, he wasn't just handing out a nice poem for Sunday service. He was handing humanity a classified blueprint for biological and spiritual evolution, a literal tool to hack your own existence. Every single syllable of that prayer, when spoken with the correct original resonance, hits a specific frequency. It interacts with your body's electromagnetic field, it structures the water inside your cells, and it vibrates your DNA into a new state. So when you lock in and pray with absolute focus and awareness, you aren't just talking to the ceiling. You are physically and spiritually activating the divine coding that has been dormant inside you. For years, mainstream scientists looked at 90% of our genome and shrugged, calling it junk DNA because they couldn't figure out what it did. But that junk is actually the gold mine. It's the hardware designed to connect you to higher dimensions of consciousness, just waiting for the right signal. Let's bring in another heavy hitter, Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, a professor over at St. Petersburg State University. He developed this incredible piece of tech called gas discharge visualization, or GDV. Basically, this machine can capture images of the human biofield, letting us see the energy we emit. Korotkov wasn't satisfied with just theories. He put this to the test. He ran comprehensive experiments to track what happens to a person's energy signature before they pray and right after. The data he got back was absolutely undeniable. After a subject engaged in deep conscious prayer, their energy field didn't just change, it exploded with light. It became significantly larger, more coherent, and harmonized. So what is the takeaway here? It proves that prayer is not just a mental exercise or an emotional release. It is a bioenergetic event. You are literally restructuring the electromagnetic force field around your body every time you go into that secret place. Now imagine combining that intent with the original sound codes, the specific Aramaic frequencies that Jesus himself utilized. You are tapping into activation keys that were architected specifically to unlock your spiritual potential. This is exactly why the true mystics and sages across every tradition have always stressed the power of the name and the precision of the sound. It is not about being superstitious or legalistic. It is about utilizing a precise spiritual technology that works. Be honest with yourself. Have you ever hit a moment in prayer where the atmosphere in the room shifted? I'm talking about those moments where the words feel like they have weight, where you feel a tangible electricity running through your veins. If you have felt that power, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comment section below because I want to see how this awakening is hitting people all across the globe right now. But listen, we have to go deeper. After uncovering the truth about the Aramaic language, the word Abba, the mistranslations, and the vibratory power of speech, we have arrived at the final revelation. We are talking about the one concept that was hidden more aggressively than anything else in history. Because this specific word, when you really grasp its full magnitude and speak it with understanding, it completely decodes the Lord's Prayer. It shifts it from being a desperate plea for help into a sovereign declaration of power. It becomes an affirmation of your divine lineage, an activation code that wakes up the Christ consciousness sleeping in your chest. You need to brace yourself, because what I'm about to break down is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about your identity. We need to talk about the Gnostics and the code that was buried in the desert. Flashback to 1945 in Egypt, near a village called Nag Hammadi. A regular farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman is digging for fertilizer, and he stumbles upon something that would rattle the cages of the religious establishment forever. He finds a sealed jar. Inside there are 13 leather-bound books containing 52 ancient texts. These are what we now call the Gnostic Gospels. These writings were buried way back in the 4th century. Monks likely hid them to stop the church authorities from burning them after the Council of Nicaea decided to edit the Bible and control the narrative. The official church labeled these texts as heresy. They wanted this knowledge wiped off the face of the earth, erased from human memory completely. So you have to ask yourself what was written on those pages that scared the establishment so much. Dr. Elaine Pagels, a brilliant scholar who spent decades analyzing the Nag Hammadi library and wrote, "The Gnostic Gospels breaks it down for us." These documents offered a version of Christianity that was radically different from the one taught in Sunday school. It wasn't a religion based on bowing down to a hierarchy or following rules. It was based on gnosis, direct personal knowledge of the divine. The Gnostics understood that the real message of Jesus wasn't just, believe in me and you'll be safe. The true message was, know thyself. Because the kingdom of heaven isn't a place you go to when you die. It is a reality locked inside you right now. Among those buried treasures, there is one text that hits differently when it comes to prayer, the Gospel of Thomas. Now, many scholars argue this text might be as old or even older than the 4 Gospels in the Bible. In it, Jesus drops this bombshell, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. But then comes the warning. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That is saying 70 in the Gospel of Thomas. This is the core of the teaching. Salvation is an inside job. It's about excavating the glory that is already residing in your spirit. So the question becomes, how do you wake that up? You do it through knowledge, through inner illumination, and through direct contact with the source. And according to the wisdom preserved at Nag Hammadi, the tool to spark that awakening is precise conscious prayer. But we are not talking about some hollow, repetitive chant you recite out of habit. We are speaking of the specific frequency that flips the switch on the Christ consciousness dormant within your DNA. Now lean in close, family, because what I am about to break down is absolutely mind-blowing when you truly grasp the magnitude of it. Deep within the Gospel of Philip, one of those suppressed Nag Hammadi scrolls found in the desert, there is a distinct, undeniable reference to a secret mode of prayer that Yahusha, or Jesus, entrusted only to his inner circle. And while the manuscript does not print the prayer out word for word in that specific section, it gives us the blueprint, the intent, and the function of it. This prayer was never meant to be a wish list you hand to a father in the sky. The purpose was absolute alignment. It is a mechanism to remind you that there is no separation between the source and the vessel. When you operate in this frequency, you stop acting like a beggar on the street corner pleading with a distant king for crumbs. You stand tall as a rightful heir, remembering your royal bloodline and your divine inheritance. Once you shift your perspective to this truth, the game changes entirely. Because if the Lord's Prayer, the foundation of our spiritual practice, is not a petition for help, but a declaration of power, an affirmation of who you are in the Spirit, then every single syllable carries a transformative weight we have ignored for centuries. When you vibrate the words Abwoon or Heavenly Father, you are not casting your eyes upward to a white man on a cloud or an external deity floating in space. You are acknowledging the divine source that flows through the galaxies and simultaneously pulses through the veins in your wrist right now. It is the as above, so below principle in action. When you declare Nethkadash Shmach, or hallowed be your name, you are not just praising a separate entity. You are sanctifying the divine signature that is stamped on your own soul, clearing the space within you to hold that sacred vibration. When you command Tede Malkathach, or thy kingdom come, you are not sitting around waiting for the rapture or some future event on a timeline. You are actively pulling the ether into the earth, invoking the manifestation of God's reality right here, right now, which according to Luke chapter 17, verse 21, is already seated inside of your chest. The Gnostics, the ancient knowers, they understood this spiritual technology better than anyone. That is precisely why, according to the Gospel of Philip, when these initiated disciples recited this prayer, it looked and sounded nothing like the dry ritualistic repetition we see in the modern church system today. To them, it was a mantra of liberation, a sonic code designed to wake up the sleeper, a declaration of their inherent godhood, and an activation key to download the memory of their true origin. They did not see themselves as miserable, broken sinners begging for a scrap of mercy. They saw themselves as divine sparks of light that had simply suffered amnesia and needed to remember their home in the stars. So you have to ask yourself, why was this specific interpretation considered so lethal to the establishment? Because a man or woman who knows they house the Creator inside needs no middleman. They have no use for a priest to interpret reality for them. They do not need to bow down to authority figures to tell them how to live. They do not need rituals or sacraments to purchase grace that they already own. They do not need a brick-and-mortar institution to gatekeep their access to the Most High. They become ungovernable because they are truly free, spiritually sovereign entities. And let me tell you, that level of spiritual liberty was the ultimate threat to a religious empire that was building its fortune and influence on the monopoly of salvation. This is why scholars like Dr. Bart Ehrman, in his work on Lost Christianities, detail how, after the Council of Nicaea, the ecclesiastical elite launched a systematic search and destroy mission to wipe these Gnostic truths off the face of the earth. They burned the libraries. They hunted down the communities that held this knowledge, persecuted the mystics, and labeled the truth as heresy to protect their control grid. By the 5th century, they had effectively scrubbed Gnosticism from the official history books, thinking they had silenced the inner knowing forever. But they underestimated the power of truth. Those 4th century monks who stuffed these scrolls into sealed jars and buried them in the caves of Nag Hammadi were preserving a time capsule for us. They were safeguarding the memory that there was once a different way to follow, the way of Christianity before the corruption took hold. A path that did not reduce you to a groveling servant, but elevated you to your rightful status, reminding you of the majesty dormant within your spirit. A teaching that did not condition you to live in fear of a vengeful God, but trained you to recognize yourself as an inseparable fractal of that God. And that ancient memory, hidden in the dark, for 1,600 years burst back into the light in 1945, surfacing exactly when we needed it for this massive shift we are in right now. We are living in 2026, a time when millions across the globe are waking up from the matrix, questioning the mainstream narratives, and hungry for a connection that goes deeper than Sunday morning routine. People are stripping away the layers of institutional control and rediscovering the raw, unfiltered teachings of Jesus. And at the core of this rediscovery is the true vibration of the Lord's Prayer, not as a plea for help, but as a quantum code, a master key that unlocks the door to your authentic self. But family, there is one final piece of the puzzle we have not touched on yet. There is a word that anchors the end of the prayer, sealing its power like a signet ring. It is a word that when spoken in the original Aramaic tongue carries a frequency and a meaning totally alien to what the English translations have led us to believe. And when you understand the true weight of this word, when you let it roll off your tongue with conscious intent in Aramaic, you are going to experience a shift that language struggles to capture. You will feel an internal click like a dislocated bone snapping back into place or a circuit finally completing its loop. It is the sensation of a door that has been bolted shut for lifetimes, suddenly swinging wide open in your spirit. And in that moment, you will know, not just in your brain, but in your gut and your bones, that you were never cut off from the divine. You were always plugged into the source, and the kingdom has been sitting right there inside you all along. You will realize the Lord's Prayer was never a ladder to climb up to God. It was a mirror to show you that you never left His presence, and that forbidden word, that final seal, is about to be unveiled right now. We have arrived at the tipping point, the moment of truth that redefines the entire script. We have gone deep into the Aramaic roots, we have exposed the translation errors, we have decoded the Gnostic secrets. And now it is time to drop the specific word that was hidden with the utmost care within the prayer. This is the word that locks the frequency in the command that activates the spiritual engine of the prayer. In the watered-down modern versions you hear today, the prayer wraps up with, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen." It sounds simple, direct, and final. But in the original Aramaic, looking at the Peshitta text and the deep dive studies by Semitic linguistic experts, the closing phrase is a completely different animal. It does not simply fade out with a passive request. It creates a boundary, a seal of protection and power that the translation, "deliver us from evil," completely fails to convey. Let's get real about the line, "deliver us from evil." When you dig into the original Aramaic phrase, talon lenisha, the standard translation completely misses the mark. It says, "And do not let us enter the trial, but separate us from that which is not ripe." Did that hit you? That is a game changer for 2026. We are not pleading, "deliver us from evil, but rather separate us from what is unripe." That Aramaic term, bisha, has been misunderstood for centuries. It does not refer to moral wickedness or sin in the Western religious sense. Bisha literally signifies the green, the immature, or that which hasn't reached its full potential yet. It is straight-up farming terminology. The ancients used it to talk about fruit that was too sour and hard to be picked from the tree. So when Yeshua closes out the Lord's Prayer with bisha, He isn't telling you to ask for a force field against external demons or spooks. He is teaching you to pray for the discernment to recognize what parts of your life are simply not ready for prime time. It is about knowing which moves to delay, which business deals to pause, and which relationships to avoid because you aren't spiritually equipped for them yet. This is a heavy revelation about divine timing and patience. It is about respecting the seasons of your life. We have to understand that there is a sacred architecture to our soul's growth, and trying to microwave the process only leads to unnecessary pain and suffering. The legendary scholar Dr. George Lamsa, who brought the Peshitta Bible into English, broke this down in his commentaries. He noted that early believers saw this as a plea for maturity. This final petition isn't about hiding from the world. It is a request for the spiritual guts to know the difference between a test and a trap. You aren't asking God to build a wall around you to keep the bad guys out. You are asking for the internal wisdom to stop acting out of spiritual childishness, to stop making moves based on fear, ego, or impatience instead of waiting for the green light from the Most High. This interpretation flips the script on the entire prayer. You are no longer crouching in a victim mentality begging for a rescue mission. You are standing tall in a learner's posture, humbly admitting that you don't always know what's best and asking the Spirit to hold you back from wrecking yourself before you're ready. But let's go deeper into the rabbit hole. The structure of that phrase, "do not let us enter the trial," holds a key to surviving the shifts coming in 2026. The word for trial or temptation here comes from the root nasa, which means to assay, to test the quality of metal, or to prove something. Here's the critical nuance. "Do not let us enter" doesn't imply God is pushing you into a trap. It implies, "Lord, don't let me step into the ring before I've trained for the fight." It is the recognition that while trials are necessary for our evolution, entering them prematurely is a recipe for disaster. We know that pressure makes diamonds and trials are inevitable for growth. But there is a massive difference between facing a giant when you are armored up and spiritually mature versus wandering onto the battlefield naked because you couldn't wait your turn. The Sufi mystics who tapped into these same ancient Semitic roots understood this law of the universe perfectly. They taught that the soul travels through specific stations of development and you cannot skip a grade. You have to master the level you are on before unlocking the next one. Forcing your spiritual evolution is like trying to pry open a rosebud. With your thumbs, you don't get a flower, you get a destroyed mess. Yeshua was dropping this same science. Now let's look at the seal of the prayer Amen. We toss this word around like a cheap period at the end of a sentence. We mumble it on autopilot, but Amen isn't just a sign-off. It is a power word in Aramaic. Amen means, so be it, or let it be solid as a rock. But in the mystical Kabbalistic traditions, it unlocks a frequency of creation. The three Hebrew letters Aleph Mem Nun form an acronym for El Melech Ne'eman, which translates to God is the faithful king. According to the Zohar, these letters map out the three dimensions of how God manifests reality in our world. Aleph is the source, the spark. Mem is the matrix, the womb of creation. Nun is the manifestation, the ripe fruit, the finished product. So when you close the prayer with Amen, you aren't just saying the end. You are sealing your intention with a declaration of faith in the entire process of bringing heaven down to earth. You are acknowledging the flow from Abba the Source through the daily bread of material needs all the way to the wisdom of waiting for the right moment, bisha. When you say Amen with full conscious awareness, you are flipping the switch on that spiritual circuit. You are aligning your personal frequency with the divine flow of the universe. You are telling the cosmos, I trust the timeline. I trust the process. Let only that which aligns with my highest destiny be birthed in the earth realm. This is infinitely more powerful than just closing a book. It is an act of conscious co-creation with the divine. Now look at the whole picture we have uncovered for this season. Abwoon is the cosmic source, not just a biological father. Shmaya is the infinite state of consciousness, not a place in the clouds. We hallow the name to remember our own divinity. We call forth the inner kingdom and ask for the sustenance to survive the matrix. And finally, we ask for liberation from our own unripe nature so we can stand fully in our power. This is the awakening. This is the petition for total spiritual liberation, crying out Patan Min Bisha, which commands the Spirit to separate us from the unripe, the immature, and the fruitless things of this world, granting us the wisdom to respect divine timing. So it is, and so let it be established in the heavens and the earth, acting as a permanent seal of conscious manifestation over your life. When you start putting all these heavy elements together and you begin to recite them in the original Aramaic tongue with full understanding and total presence, you have to understand you are no longer just praying in the traditional sense. You are activating, you are aligning your frequency, and you are awakening the sleeping giant within. The complete Lord's Prayer, when spoken in its original form, is nothing less than a spiritual activation code, a master key designed to unlock the heavy doors of higher consciousness, serving as the ultimate reminder that you were never ever separated from the Most High. And now that you have received the download of the complete code every single time you go into your secret place to pray, this prayer, whether you speak it in the ancient Aramaic or in your own native language, as long as you hold that deep, resonating understanding of its true meaning, you will be accessing a level of power and authority that the majority of modern Christians have never experienced simply because they were never taught that this kind of power was available to them. It was deliberately hidden, buried under layers of tradition for centuries, but now the veil is being torn and it has been revealed specifically for you at this exact pivotal moment in history. Do you think that is a coincidence, or is it destiny? Your soul was ready to remember who you really are. Your great awakening begins right now in this season. If you have listened this far, let me tell you it was not by accident or happenstance. There is absolutely nothing on this spiritual walk that happens by accident. Your soul, your higher self, guided you to this specific revelation precisely when your spirit was mature enough to receive the meat of the word rather than just the milk. Now, I want you to take a moment and look back at everything you have discovered on this journey. Realize that the words you have been repeating out of habit for years, perhaps since you were a little child, sitting in Sunday school, carried heavy secrets and frequencies that the system never taught you. You are realizing that the original language Jesus or Yeshua actually spoke contained dimensions of meaning, depth, and power that were completely lost in the westernized translations we were given. You have to understand that there was a specific moment in history when those profound, life-altering meanings were deliberately diluted, standardized, and simplified by the powers that be to serve political structures that needed to control your access to the divine. You need to know that entire communities, the Essenes, the Gnostics, the Aramaic Christians, fought to preserve more complete, more mystical, and significantly more powerful versions of these teachings for centuries, while the empire tried to wipe them out, and realized that those potent versions were hidden away in dark caves, locked in forgotten manuscripts, and kept alive in almost extinct oral traditions until now, until this critical moment in history when the earth is shaking and the truth is finally coming to the light. Why is this happening now? Because we are living in a prophetic timeline, family. We are in a time where, according to ancient traditions across the board, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, the hidden truths that were sealed up are destined to be revealed. In the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 4, the scripture is clear when it says, "But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase." Look around you. We are in that time right now. Knowledge is increasing at a rate we have never seen before. Lost manuscripts are being dug up from the sands of time. Ancient translations are being studied with brand new academic tools and spiritual eyes. And millions of people all around the globe are waking up, questioning the official narratives, seeking deeper spiritual connections, and rediscovering the original undiluted teachings of the illuminated masters. Make no mistake, you are a vital part of that global awakening. And the Lord's Prayer, this prayer that seems so simple, so familiar, so routine, is now revealed to be something completely different. It is a weapon of mass instruction. It is not a prayer of begging and supplication to some distant God floating on a cloud. It is a direct activation code of your inner divinity and your royal identity. It is not a text to be memorized mechanically and mumbled through. It is a vibratory key that, when pronounced with conscious awareness, blasts open the doors in your soul. It is not just a religious formula used to try and gain divine favor or blessings. It is a powerful reminder that you and the Father are one, that the kingdom of God is within you, and that you carry in your very essence the same divine spark and DNA that animated Jesus Buddha and all the illuminated masters who walked this earth before us. And now that you know this truth, you have a heavy responsibility. You cannot pretend you do not know what time it is. You cannot go back to sleep and pray the Lord's Prayer in that same distracted, mechanical, lifeless way that the religious system taught you. Every single time you recite it from this day forward, do it with full consciousness. Feel the weight of each word. Remember its profound, ancient meaning. Invoke the divine presence that is dwelling both inside of you and all around you. And if you really want to experience the complete raw power of this prayer, commit to learning to recite it in the Aramaic tongue. Listen, you do not need to be a biblical scholar. You do not need to go to seminary or study years of linguistics to get this. You just need to listen to the words with your spirit, repeat them with intention, and feel their vibration resonating in your body. There are resources available right now, recordings by native Aramaic speakers, phonetic transliterations, and pronunciation guides that make it accessible to everyone. If you dedicate even just 5 minutes a day for 1 week, I promise you will see how your prayer experience shifts into a whole new dimension. You will feel something different, a shift that words in English just cannot manage to capture. You will feel a resonance in your chest, a tingling in your crown, and a fire in the center of your being. That resonance you feel is real. It is not the placebo effect. It is not suggestion. It is the literal activation of vibratory patterns and spiritual DNA that have been dormant in your bloodline. And once those patterns are activated, they begin to transform you from the inside out. Now, I know some people are going to feel uncomfortable with these revelations because it challenges their tradition. They will cry out and say it is heresy that you are deviating from the traditional faith, or that it is dangerous to question the official translations handed down by the church fathers. But you have to ask yourself this question: who truly has more authority over your soul? Is it the 4th century councils that voted on which texts were orthodox and which were heretical based on their political needs? Or is it the original words Jesus actually spoke out of his own mouth? Is it the translations made by men with political and ecclesiastical agendas to control the masses? Or the Aramaic manuscripts preserved for millennia by the faithful remnant? Do you choose the comfort of continuing to believe what you were always told by the system? Or do you have the courage to seek the deeper truth, even if that search makes you uncomfortable and forces you to grow? Remember what the master teacher, Jesus himself, said in the book of John, chapter 8, verse 32, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." He never commanded us to blindly obey religious hierarchies or submit to man-made institutions to be saved. The Messiah gave us the ultimate key to breaking the matrix when he declared that you will know the truth, and that truth is a weapon against the system. We are talking about true knowledge, gnosis, a direct and unfiltered experience with the Most High. That is the only power strong enough to shatter the chains of mental slavery and provide you with absolute spiritual liberation. That freedom is activated the moment you find the courage to pull back the veil of deception, to challenge the mainstream narratives, and to hunt down the raw original words spoken 2,000 years ago in the hills of Galilee before they were edited by the powers that be. Understand that this is merely the launch pad for your awakening. We have to dig much deeper into the suppressed history of Mary Magdalene and expose why the establishment was so terrified of her true authority in the early movement. We need to uncover the forbidden gospels and the lost books that were deliberately left out of the official Bible, because they contained spiritual technologies and teachings the elite didn't want the masses to access. There are metaphysical codes and secret ciphers locked within the scriptures, ancient mysteries that the true mystics understood and guarded, but were systematically hidden from the public to keep us in the dark. We are watching biblical prophecy manifest in real time right now in 2026. This is the era of the great revealing where millions of people are waking up from the slumber of ages and reclaiming their stolen heritage. I want to honor you for staying with this message until the very end. It speaks volumes about your character, revealing a desperate hunger for reality and a refusal to settle for the watered-down lies of this world. It proves you have the warrior spirit necessary to question the status quo and the spiritual maturity to handle the esoteric wisdom that was locked away in secret societies for centuries, reserved only for the chosen few. As you move forward, I pray that the undeniable light of truth burns away all confusion and illuminates every single step of your destiny in these critical times. May the ancient frequency of the original prayer unlock your genetic memory and remind you of your royal lineage. Every time you speak the words, Abu Dashea, let it vibrate in your soul that you were never separated from the source. You are an extension of the divine. We will go even deeper into these mysteries in the next upload. Until then, stay vigilant, keep your eyes open, and walk boldly in the light.